New York City, 1933. The height of the Great Depression. A city divided not just by concrete and steel, but by an invisible line that cut deeper than any knife. Down in lower Manhattan, in the backrooms of Italian restaurants and plush hotels, a new empire was being built. It was an empire of order, structure, and blood. The man building it was Charles "Lucky" Luciano. He was rewriting the rules of the American Mafia. He had destroyed the old mustache PTs, the old school Sicilian bosses who refused to change, and he had created the Commission. He was the chairman of the board, the boss of bosses. He believed he owned New York, but uptown, past the invisible border of 110th Street. In the beating heart of Harlem, there was a different kind of king. He didn't have a commission. He didn't have the politicians in his pocket. Not yet. What he had was a razor-sharp mind, a terrifying reputation, and a switchblade that he could use faster than the blink of an eye. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, to the outside world, he was a criminal, a thug. But to the people of Harlem, he was something much more complicated. He was a protector, a barrier, a necessary evil. History books often summarize their relationship in one sentence: they worked together. But that is a lie. That is the polite version. The truth is far more violent. Before they were partners, they were enemies. Before there was peace, there was a war that turned the sidewalks of Harlem red. And before the handshake that changed history, there was a moment, a single tension-filled meeting, where the most powerful mobster in the world, Lucky Luciano, looked at Bumpy Johnson and realized that if he wanted Harlem, he would have to burn it to the ground. This is the story of that war. This is the story of the day the Mafia bowed to the Harlem Godfather. To understand why Bumpy Johnson was different, you have to understand where he came from. Most gangsters in the 1930s were thugs. They were muscle. They broke legs for $10 and killed for $100. They didn't think past tomorrow. Bumpy was different. Born in Charleston, South Carolina, he moved north to escape the racial terror of the South, only to find a different kind of jungle in New York. He was small, he was bumpy, headed, hence the nickname. But he was brilliant. He didn't just spend his time on the corner. He spent his time in the library. And when the law eventually caught up with him, he spent his time in prison, not lifting weights, but lifting ideas. He read history. He read philosophy. He studied Napoleon, Genghis Khan, and Machiavelli. While other criminals were learning how to crack safes, Bumpy was learning how to crack people. He understood psychology. He knew that true power wasn't about being the loudest man in the room. It was about being the one everyone else was watching. When he was released from prison in 1932, he returned to a Harlem that was under siege. The Great Depression had crushed the economy. Jobs were non-existent. Hope was a luxury nobody could afford. The only industry that was thriving was the numbers. The numbers game policy. It was a chaotic, beautiful, illegal lottery. For a penny or a nickel, a Harlem resident could bet on a 3-digit number. If they won, the payout could pay their rent for a month. It was the poor man's stock market. And the CEO of this market was a woman. Madame Stephanie St. Clair, the queen of numbers? Madame St. Clair was a force of nature. She was Caribbean, she was educated, and she was fearless. She had built a multi-million-dollar empire in the middle of the Depression. But success attracts predators. And the biggest predator in New York was looking north. His name was Arthur Flegenheimer, but the streets knew him as Dutch Schultz. If Lucky Luciano was the CEO of crime, Dutch Schultz was its rabid dog. He was volatile, paranoid, and incredibly violent. He didn't believe in negotiation. He believed in brute force. Schultz looked at Harlem and saw millions of dollars flowing through the hands of black bankers and runners. In his racist worldview, this money didn't belong to them. He believed he could just walk in and take it. "They're nobodies," Schultz reportedly screamed at his men. "Go up there and smash them. Take the books. Take the money. If they resist, kill them." And so the invasion began. It wasn't subtle. Schultz's men, the infamous 40 thieves, rolled into Harlem in convoys. They kicked down the doors of candy stores that fronted for Numbers banks. They pistol-whipped women. They threw runners through plate, glass windows. The Harlem Numbers bankers were terrified. They were businessmen, not soldiers. They looked to Madame St. Clair for protection, but even she was overwhelmed. Her independent enforcers were being picked off one by one. The police, paid off by Schultz, turned a blind eye. Harlem was bleeding. The community was losing its wealth to a man who despised them. Madame St. Clair knew she needed a weapon. She needed someone who didn't fear death. She needed someone who could look the devil in the face and smile. She found Bumpy Johnson. St. Clair made Bumpy her chief enforcer. It was the most dangerous job in New York. Schultz had put a bounty on the head of anyone who resisted him. But Bumpy didn't just take the job for the money. For Bumpy, this was personal. This was about Harlem. Schultz expected a quick surrender. What he got was a nightmare. Bumpy Johnson knew he couldn't beat Schultz's army in an open field. Schultz had machine guns, armored cars, and hundreds of soldiers. Bumpy had a handful of loyal men, shotguns, and straight razors. So Bumpy rewrote the rules of engagement. He turned the streets of Harlem into a labyrinth of death for any Dutchman who dared to enter. This was guerrilla warfare. Bumpy used the environment. He knew every alley, every rooftop, every cellar door in Harlem. When Schultz's bagmen came to collect money, they would walk into a building and never walk out. There is a famous story, part legend, part fact, of a hitman named Big Sal. Sal was one of Schultz's toughest enforcers. He was sent to 125th Street to send a message to Bumpy. He walked into a bar, loudly demanding to know where Johnson was. The legend goes that Bumpy didn't even stand up. He waited until Sal was close, then moved with that terrifying speed. A flash of silver. When the police found Sal, he was alive, but he would never hold a gun again. His trigger fingers were gone. And in his pocket was a note, written in Bumpy's elegant handwriting. Harlem is closed for repairs. The psychological toll on Schultz's men was devastating. They started refusing orders to go uptown. They called Harlem the Coffin. Bumpy wasn't just killing them, he was haunting them. Schultz was furious. He was losing money, he was losing face, and he was losing men. He increased the violence, ordering indiscriminate drive by shootings. But every time he pushed, Bumpy pushed back harder. And watching all of this from the shadows of his penthouse suite was Lucky Luciano. Lucky Luciano was a businessman above all else. He viewed crime as a corporation, and right now Dutch Schultz was a bad investment. Luciano saw the chaos. He saw the headlines. Gang war in Harlem. The attention was dangerous. The FBI was starting to look closer at organized crime because of the noise Schultz was making. But Luciano saw something else too. He saw talent. "Who is this kid?" Luciano asked. "Who is stopping the Dutchman?" "His name is Johnson," Lansky replied. "They call him Bumpy. He's smart. Lucky, he's very smart." In the 1930s Mafia, race was a strict barrier. Italians worked with Italians. Maybe Jews like Lansky, but black gangsters. They were seen as tools, not partners. Luciano, however, was a visionary. He didn't care about the color of a man's skin, he cared about the color of his money. And he realized that Bumpy Johnson was doing the impossible, holding off a national crime syndicate with nothing but wits and will. By 1935, Dutch Schultz had become a liability to the entire Mafia Commission. He was planning to assassinate Thomas Dewey, a special prosecutor. Luciano knew that killing a lawman of that stature would bring the U.S. Army down on the mob. The decision was made. The Mad Dog had to be put down. On the 23rd of October 1935, Dutch Schultz was gunned down in a bathroom in Newark, New Jersey. The war was over, but the problem wasn't. Harlem was now an open territory. The numbers, millions, were up for grabs. Every mob family in New York wanted a piece. Luciano could have done what Schultz did. Invade. He had the power to crush Bumpy Johnson. He had an army 10 times the size of Schultz's. But Luciano remembered the guerrilla war. He remembered the dead bodies. He remembered the coffin. He decided to do something different. He sent a message to Harlem, not a threat, an invitation. The meeting took place in neutral territory. Some say it was a warehouse near the docks. Others say it was a suite at the Teresa Hotel. Bumpy Johnson arrived alone. This was a statement. He was showing he wasn't afraid. He wore a gray double-breasted suit, a fedora tilted slightly to the left, and his hands were empty. But everyone knew he was never truly unarmed. Waiting for him was Lucky Luciano. Flanked by 2 bodyguards, Luciano sat at a small wooden table. He didn't rise when Bumpy entered. The silence in the room was heavy enough to crush a man. These were 2 predators from different worlds, sizing each other up. Luciano spoke first. His voice was calm, raspy from years of smoking. "You caused the Dutchman a lot of trouble, kid." Bumpy didn't blink. "The Dutchman caused himself trouble. I just helped him find it." Luciano leaned forward. "Let's talk business. Schultz is gone. But the families, they still want Harlem. There's too much money on the table. If I walk away, Genovese will come. If not him, then Gambino. You can fight 1 war? Bumpy. Can you fight 5? It was a valid threat. Bumpy was brilliant, but he wasn't a god. He knew he couldn't fight the entire commission forever. But he also knew he couldn't surrender. If he gave up Harlem, he would lose everything he fought for. "I don't work for you, Lucky," Bumpy said softly. "And I don't work for the commission. Harlem is my home. If your men come uptown to run the banks, they won't come back. You know that." Luciano nodded. He did know that. "So what's the play?" And this is the moment the legend was cemented. Bumpy Johnson proposed a structure that had never existed before. "The numbers stay in Harlem," Bumpy said. "My bankers, my runners, my territory. No Italian soldiers on 125th Street, no shakedowns." "And what do I get?" Luciano asked. "You get a cut," Bumpy replied. "A percentage of the top in exchange. You give us protection from the cops downtown. You give us the political cover, and you make sure the other 5 families know. Harlem is off limits." For a mob boss of Luciano's stature, accepting these terms was unheard of. It was essentially admitting that he couldn't conquer this territory. It was a compromise, but Luciano was a pragmatist. He saw a man who could keep order. He saw a man who commanded loyalty that money couldn't buy. Luciano stood up. He extended his hand. "Deal." They shook hands. In that moment, Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a gangster anymore. He was a partner to the most powerful criminal organization in America. He had forced the Italian Mafia to knock on the door before entering. He had made the king bow. The deal held. For decades, the alliance between Bumpy Johnson and the Genovese crime family was the backbone of the Harlem underworld. Bumpy became the gatekeeper. If you wanted to do business in Harlem, you saw Bumpy. If you had a problem in Harlem, you saw Bumpy. He became a complex figure. To the authorities, he was a vicious criminal trafficking heroin and controlling gambling. He spent years in Alcatraz, where he commanded respect even among the hardest convicts in the federal system. But to Harlem, he was the old man. He paid rents. He bought turkeys for Thanksgiving. He paid for tuitions. He was a Robin Hood with a switchblade. He moved between worlds. He was friends with celebrities. He played chess. And he even formed a bond with Malcolm X in the 1960s, offering protection to the civil rights leader when his enemies closed in. But the world was changing. The golden age of the mob was fading. Luciano was deported to Italy. The drugs that Bumpy helped bring in were destroying the very community he claimed to protect. The hero and the villain were becoming impossible to separate. Yet through it all, one thing remained constant. No one disrespected Bumpy Johnson. The 7th of July, 1968. Wells Restaurant in Harlem. Bumpy Johnson was 62 years old. His heart was failing. He was under indictment. The era of the flamboyant gangster was ending. He sat with his friends, laughing, telling stories. Perhaps he thought about the old days, about the war with Dutch Schultz, about the day he stared down Lucky Luciano. He died of a heart attack right there in the restaurant. Or so the official report says. In Harlem, whispers always remain. Was it natural? Was it poison? Or was it simply that a heart as big and burdened as his finally just stopped? When Bumpy Johnson died, 5,000 people attended his funeral. They didn't come for a thug. They came for the man who stood tall when everyone else was told to kneel. The legend of Bumpy Johnson isn't just about crime, it's about resistance. It's about a man who carved out a kingdom in a world that wanted him to be a servant. Lucky Luciano may have invented the modern mafia, but Bumpy Johnson, he was the one man Luciano couldn't own. What do you think? Was Bumpy Johnson a hero who defended his people, or a villain who poisoned his own community? And could anyone survive today against the odds he faced? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the untold legend, hit that like button and subscribe. We have more stories the history books are afraid to tell you.